I never thought a few feet of concrete could destroy years of peace, but that's exactly what happened when my own neighbor decided my driveway violated community aesthetics. It started small, a single piece of paper taped to my door, a simple HOA violation notice. I remember standing there in my bathrobe, morning coffee cooling in my hand, staring at those words like they couldn't possibly apply to me. Driveway placement obstructs shared property boundary. Immediate compliance required. At first I laughed. The driveway hadn't changed in 15 years. It was where it had always been, cut cleanly through the front yard, ending just before the narrow strip of grass that divided my property from Greg's. Greg. Even now, that name still carries weight in my mind. The kind of name that arrives with a certain posture, a smug smile, a clipboard tucked under one arm. He'd been the HOA president for less than 6 months when this all began, but in that time, he'd already transformed Lakeview Meadows into his own personal empire. At first, I thought the notice was a mistake. Maybe an automated letter, a clerical error, something that would clear itself up once I explained. I even called the HOA office that morning, my voice still friendly, patient, but the woman who answered, quiet, polite, clearly exhausted, told me the violation had come directly from the president himself. That was the moment the coffee in my hand went cold. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that I'd done nothing wrong. I'd always paid my dues on time. My lawn was trimmed, my garden neat. I even helped organize last year's neighborhood cleanup, which Greg had shown up to, late of course, to take credit for. So why target me? At first I told myself it was random. Maybe he was just doing his job, but deep down I knew better. I'd seen the way Greg looked at people, like he was measuring them, deciding who fit into his idea of a perfect neighborhood and who didn't. And I apparently didn't. Before Greg moved in, Lakeview Meadows was the kind of place where nothing really happened, and that was exactly how I liked it. Every house matched. Every lawn mirrored its neighbors. There were rules for everything. Fence height, mailbox color, the kind of tree you could plant. But for me, those rules meant predictability. After my divorce, I needed that. I needed quiet routines. Morning walks with my son Ethan, coffee on the porch, the hum of sprinklers down the street. We weren't rich, but we were stable. Ethan was 17, a mix of shy and stubborn, the kind of kid who kept to himself, but never missed a chance to defend someone being picked on. He'd inherited that from me. The unwillingness to look away when something felt wrong. The house wasn't perfect. The driveway had a slight tilt. The porch paint chipped every winter, and the roof creaked when it rained. But it was ours. That made what came next all the harder to swallow. Greg appeared one spring afternoon, tall, tan, that sort of overly confident man who seemed born to lead meetings that should have been emails. He wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and his wife, Dana, always seemed to hover just behind him, smiling tightly at everything he said. When they moved into the corner house across from me, I baked them muffins and brought them over like any decent neighbor would. He accepted them with that perfect politician's grin and said, "It's nice to finally have some structure around here." I should have known. Within months, he'd campaigned for HOA president. He won easily. No one else even wanted the job. At first, people liked him. He promised order, community improvement, a better image for Lakeview Meadows. He introduced lawn inspections, mail slot standardization, even parking rotation schedules, claiming it was to prevent clutter. Most residents went along with it, either out of apathy or fear of fines. But the thing about power is, it never stops where it starts. Greg started using his position to control everything. Who could plant what? Who could park where? Who could hang Christmas lights? And how early they could go up. He even fined Mrs. Lowe, an 82-year-old widow, for leaving her trash bins out too long after collection day. The board approved it all, not because they agreed, but because no one wanted to challenge him. Then one morning, his SUV appeared in front of my driveway, unparked so close I could barely back out. I thought it was coincidence. The next day, it was there again. And the next? At first, I brushed it off, but then came the letter. The violation notice felt like a slap. My driveway, the same one that had existed since before Greg even moved in, it was suddenly a community obstruction. I read the letter over and over, trying to make sense of it. The phrasing was intentionally vague, buried in HOA jargon. Something about property alignment and shared boundaries, but what it really said was simple. You're a problem now. I sent a calm email that afternoon. Dear Greg, I received a notice that I believe was sent in error. My driveway has not been modified and is entirely within my property line. Could we discuss this? He replied 3 days later with a single line. All violations are issued following inspection and confirmed by the HOA board. That was it. No explanation. No evidence. Just dismissal. I started noticing other things too. My trash cans moved 2 feet from where I'd left them. A warning sticker appeared on Ethan's car, claiming he was unauthorized. Neighbors who used to wave at me now avoided eye contact. Something was shifting. And it wasn't just about a driveway anymore. Lakeview Meadows had always looked perfect from the outside. Manicured lawns, matching shutters, polite smiles, but beneath the surface it was fragile. The HOA wasn't about community. It was about control, and Greg knew exactly how to use it. He began holding inspection walks, strolling through the neighborhood with a clipboard, jotting notes while residents peeked from behind curtains. He said it was about consistency, but I knew it was about power. He fined a young couple for having an unapproved mailbox. Color. He reprimanded another family for leaving toys in their front yard. No one questioned him until me. When I refused to move my driveway, a physical impossibility. By the way, Greg took it as defiance. The next week, I received a $250 fine for failure to comply with community modification order. Then, a week later, another Ethan tried to console me, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Mom, can't we just do whatever he wants? He asked one night. I looked at him across the dinner table, his teenage face caught between frustration and fear. That's exactly what he wants, I said quietly. If we give in once, he'll never stop. The next morning, my driveway was blocked again, not by Greg's SUV this time, but by 2 bright orange traffic cones. Each cone had a small tag attached, reserved for community access. Greg stood across the street, pretending to chat with a neighbor, his smirk barely hidden. I walked over and calmly picked up the cones. Those belong to the HOA, he said, stepping closer. They were on my property, I replied. Now they belong to me. The look in his eyes told me everything. He wasn't expecting resistance. That was the moment our quiet war began. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. My mailbox started filling with anonymous complaint slips, all citing ridiculous reasons. Lawn too dry, wind chime too loud, improper flower colors. It was absurd. Ethan's car was towed from our own driveway for blocking emergency access. When I called the towing company, they said the order came directly from the HOA. When I confronted Greg, he said with that same grin, "You'll need to take that up with the board." He was the board. Meetings became a joke. Anytime I raised a concern, he'd interrupt, redirect, or outright silence me. He had allies, people who either feared him or benefited from siding with him. One of them, a neighbor named Linda, started spreading rumors that I'd been belligerent at meetings, that I was unfit to live in a shared community. Within a month, I was a pariah. I stopped going to community events. I started keeping my curtains closed. Even Ethan withdrew, spending more time in his room, avoiding the tension that seemed to cling to every inch of the house. I remember lying awake one night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down. I'd bought this house to find peace. Now it felt like a prison. The day I broke wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, humiliatingly ordinary. I was watering the small flower bed by the porch when Greg's SUV screeched to a stop across the street. He got out, holding a clipboard and camera. "Documenting violations," he said flatly. "Snapping photos of my front yard? That's harassment," I said, voice shaking. He shrugged. "It's procedure." Something inside me snapped. "Procedure doesn't mean you get to harass people, Greg." He smiled, that slow, controlled smile of a man who thinks he's untouchable. "Then follow the rules, Emma, and you won't have to worry." He got back into his car, rolled up his window, and drove off, leaving me standing there, hose still running, heart pounding. That was the moment I decided I wasn't going to be his victim anymore. I spent that entire weekend researching. I dove deep into state housing laws, HOA bylaws, anything that could help me understand where his power ended and mine began. What I found changed everything. Greg couldn't touch anything that was fully within my property line. The HOA had no authority there. He could threaten, fine, intimidate, but he couldn't physically alter my space. I realized something important. He'd built his power on fear, not legality, and I was done being afraid. That night, while Ethan slept, I sat at the kitchen table sketching on a notepad. The plan came together slowly, almost calmly, like I'd known it all along. 4 enormous stone planters, each one heavy enough to be immovable without industrial equipment. Each one placed exactly at the edge of my driveway, just inside my property line. They'd be decorative, of course, filled with flowers, but they'd also serve another purpose, a barrier, not against cars. Against him, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Greg wanted control? Fine, I'd give him something he couldn't control. Morning sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, catching the edge of the notepad where I'd drawn my plan. 4 rectangles, heavy, unmovable, defiant. They weren't just planters, they were a line in the sand. The next day, I called a local landscaping company. The man who answered, an older contractor named Dennis, asked what I needed. "I need large stone planters," I said, "as big and heavy as you can legally install." He chuckled. "How heavy are we talking?" "Let's say 4 tons each." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low whistle. "Lady, those won't be planters. They'll be monuments." "Perfect," I said quietly. Dennis and his crew arrived 2 days later to take measurements. They were polite but curious, exchanging glances when I showed them the driveway's boundary line, precisely marked by the surveyor's stakes I'd placed the night before. I made sure of every inch each planter would sit just inside my property line, not 1 millimeter over. I even had the survey documents notarized and printed in case Greg tried to challenge it. When Dennis realized how serious I was, his tone changed. "Are you expecting someone to try and move them?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Let's just say I want to make sure they can't." He grinned back. "We'll make them so solid, not even a truck could budge them." For the first time in months, I felt in control again. Of course, Greg noticed before construction even began. He saw Dennis's truck outside that morning, the men unloading tools, measuring tape, stretching across the driveway. By the time I stepped outside, clipboard in hand, Greg was already marching across the street. "What's going on here?" he demanded, flashing his HOA badge like it meant something. "Landscaping," I replied smoothly. "All within property lines." He frowned, peering at the stakes. "You didn't submit a modification request?" "I don't need one," I said, my voice calm. "Section 7B of the HOA charter. No submission required for ground-level decorative features within personal property boundaries." He blinked. He wasn't expecting me to know that. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, holding up the printed page, and I already checked with the county clerk to confirm. For a second, Greg's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but no words came out. He glared, turned sharply, and walked away, but I saw the look in his eyes as he did, a flicker of something. He wasn't used to feeling powerlessness. The installation, it took 3 days to finish. Massive stone planters, each carved from dense granite, each weighing roughly 4 tons, were lowered by crane onto the exact points I'd marked. I watched the process from my porch, the steady hum of machinery filling the air, the sun beating down on polished stone. Ethan came outside, his eyes wide. "Mom," he said, half laughing, half nervous, "are you sure this isn't overkill?" I looked at the towering planters, massive, immovable, a statement carved in stone. "No," I said, "this is was balance. When the crew finished, they filled each planter with rich soil and flowers, lavender, petunias, creeping vines that would trail beautifully once they grew in. By sunset, my driveway was framed like a fortress of color and stone. I stood there with Ethan, hands on hips, breathing in the quiet satisfaction. Across the street, Greg stood at his window, watching. I waved. He didn't wave back. The next morning, a new notice appeared on my door. It wasn't a fine this time. It was a safety concern citation. Unapproved permanent structures obstruct visual access to shared roadway. Immediate removal required to comply with community safety ordinance. I laughed loudly. It wasn't even an official HOA rule. It was something Greg had clearly fabricated. Still, I played it smart. I took photos of everything: the planters, the survey stakes, the property documents. I emailed the board, copied the county zoning office, and politely requested proof of any ordinance violations. 2 days passed. No response. Then, one night around 11 p.m., I heard a noise outside. A low, grinding rumble. I looked out the window and froze. A tow truck. Its floodlights shone directly on my driveway. Greg stood beside it, arms crossed. I rushed outside, my heart hammering. "What are you doing?" I shouted over the engine noise. Greg turned, smug as ever. "Removing unapproved obstructions." "They're not obstructions, they're planters." "On community property," he said, motioning to the driver. "They're on my property," I snapped, holding up the survey map I'd printed earlier. "You're trespassing?" The tow truck driver hesitated. "Sir, you sure this is authorized?" Greg glared at him. "You're under HOA directive. Proceed." I stepped directly between the tow truck and the planters. My pulse thundered in my ears. "You move those and I'll call the police," I said firmly. "Right now." Greg smirked. "Go ahead." So I did. By the time the officers arrived, Greg was fuming. I calmly showed them my documents, the notarized survey, and the HOA bylaws highlighting personal property protection. The officers examined everything, then turned to Greg. "Sir," one of them said evenly, "you're not authorized to remove private property." Greg's face turned red. "This is community." "It's not," the officer cut in. "You step back now." I'll never forget that moment. The way Greg's jaw clenched, the way his composure cracked just slightly. He turned, muttered something under his breath, and stalked off into the dark. The tow truck idled for a few seconds, then rolled away. I stood there in the driveway, the cool night air wrapping around me, the stone planters looming tall behind me like silent sentinels. For the first time, I felt safe, but I knew it wasn't over. The next few weeks were hell. Greg couldn't touch the planters, but he found other ways to make my life miserable. Sudden inspections, constant fines for unapproved foliage, noise disturbances, improper lighting. One morning, I found bright orange stickers slapped across my mailbox. "Delinquent homeowner. Immediate compliance required." It wasn't true, of course. My payments were up to date, but perception mattered more than truth in this neighborhood. People whispered. Neighbors who used to wave now avoided me entirely. Even Ethan got targeted. He came home one afternoon, furious. "They told me I can't park in front of our house anymore," he said. I clenched my fists. "Who told you that?" "Greg. He said we're under review." I wanted to scream. Instead, I took photos, saved every notice, every violation, every email. I was done reacting. Now I was collecting evidence, because I knew sooner or later he'd slip, and when he did, I'd be ready. A week later, I got an anonymous message in my mailbox, handwritten on plain paper. "You're not the only one. Come to the park gazebo at 6 p.m. tonight." A neighbor I almost didn't go, but curiosity won. When I arrived, 3 people were already there, all familiar faces from around the neighborhood. Mrs. Lowe, the widow Greg had fined for her trash bins, the young couple with the mailbox issue, and Mark, a quiet man from down the street whose fence Greg had forced him to repaint twice. They all looked tired, angry, defeated. "We've all had it," Mark said. "He's gone too far." I listened as they shared story after story, petty fines, threats, harassment. That's when I realized Greg wasn't just targeting me, he was controlling everyone. I told them about my planters, about how Greg tried to tow them. They stared in awe. "You actually stood up to him," Mrs. Lowe whispered. "It's the only language he understands," I said. That night, we formed an unofficial alliance. We started sharing information, board meeting minutes, emails, everything. And what we discovered was worse than I imagined. Greg had been using HOA funds, our dues, to pay for personal landscaping and even consulting fees for companies he owned. He was bleeding the community dry, hiding behind bureaucracy and intimidation. That was when I decided this wouldn't just be about my driveway anymore. This was about taking him down. The next HOA meeting was packed. Word had spread. The neighborhood buzzed with quiet rebellion. I arrived early, documents neatly organized in a binder, every violation, every fine, every photo labeled and dated. Greg opened the meeting with his usual smug tone. "Before we begin, I'd like to address ongoing non-compliance issues." "Actually," I said, standing, "I'd like to address ongoing abuse of power." The room went silent. Greg froze. "Excuse me?" I walked to the front, my voice steady. "You've targeted homeowners unfairly, fabricated rules, and misused community funds. I have proof." I opened the binder and laid out the copies. Printed invoices, bank statements, and minutes showing payments made to his consulting firm. The board members leaned in. Murmurs filled the room. Greg's face went pale. "This is slander," he snapped. "No," I said calmly. "It's transparency. Something this HOA hasn't had since you took over." The tension was electric. Then Mrs. Lowe stood. "She's right. He fined me $300 for leaving my bin out 15 minutes late." The young couple spoke next. "He made us repaint our fence because it clashed with his house." Voices rose around the room, one after another, years of frustration pouring out. Greg slammed his gavel. "Enough! This is out of order!" "No," Mark said from the back. "This is exactly what order looks like." The room erupted. By the end of that night, the board voted to suspend Greg's authority pending investigation. He stormed out before the motion resolution even passed, but I knew he wouldn't go quietly. Sure enough, the next morning, a lawyer's letter arrived in my mailbox. Greg was suing me for defamation. He claimed I'd ruined his reputation, interfered with HOA operations, and caused emotional distress. It was absurd, but it was also terrifying. I couldn't afford a drawn-out legal battle, but I also couldn't back down. That's when I got a call from a local news reporter. Apparently, someone had tipped them off about a neighborhood in chaos. I didn't know who it was. Maybe Mark, maybe Mrs. Lowe, but I agreed to talk. 2 days later, a news van rolled into Lakeview Meadows. The reporter interviewed several residents, all off camera, afraid of retaliation. Then she came to me. I stood beside the planters as the camera rolled, the evening sun glinting off the stone. This isn't about plants or driveways, I said. It's about people being bullied in their own homes. We just want fairness, not fear. The story aired that night. By morning, it had gone viral locally. Headlines read, HOA president accused of harassment and misuse of funds. Emails poured into the board office. The county announced an audit. Greg's empire was crumbling, but Greg wasn't finished. He still had one last card to play. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I heard a knock at the door. It was Greg. His expression was different this time. Cold, calculating. You've made a mistake, he said quietly. You think you've won, but you haven't. I didn't answer. You're going to regret this, he whispered. You don't know who you're dealing with. Then he turned and walked away, leaving those words hanging in the air like smoke. For a long moment, I stood frozen, heart pounding. Then I looked out the window, at the planters, glowing softly in the fading light, and whispered to myself, we'll see. The knock came again at midnight. Sharp, steady, confident. I froze in the hallway, halfway between fear and fury. Ethan stirred in his room. I whispered for him to stay put. Through the peephole, I saw a silhouette. Greg, standing beneath the porch light, a folder in his hand, rain dripping from his jacket. I opened the door just enough for my voice to slip through. What do you want? He smiled without warmth. To give you one last chance to withdraw your statements before the audit tomorrow. I stared. You came to my house in the middle of the night to threaten me again? It's not a threat. It's advice. His voice was low, deliberate. You've stirred up things you don't understand. You're ruining a good neighborhood. For what? Attention? I stepped fully into the doorway, the planters looming behind me like stone guardians. For peace. For fairness. For everyone you've bullied. His eyes hardened. You're going to regret this. Then he shoved the folder toward me. Inside were printouts, my emails to neighbors, a copy of the news article, even screenshots of my social media posts. He'd been monitoring me. Defamation, he said quietly. Libel. Interference with HOA operations. I can take everything from you. I looked him straight in the eye. You already took enough. I shut the door. Through the wood, I heard his voice one last time, calm, almost eerily gentle. This isn't over, Emma. Morning sunlight sliced through heavy clouds as auditors arrived at the community center. Cars lined the streets. Curious residents whispered in small groups. I sat inside, binder on my lap, heart pounding. Across the room, Greg stood near the podium, expression stiff. He wore a tailored suit, but the arrogance that once cloaked him had frayed. The county investigator, Ms. Raines, began reading from a stack of documents. According to financial records obtained through subpoena, multiple payments were made from the HOA's maintenance fund to a company called Lakeside Consulting LLC. That company, according to state registry, is owned solely by Gregory Thorne. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Greg straightened. Those were legitimate reimbursements for my time. Ms. Raines didn't flinch. $12,800 in reimbursements for administrative oversight without board approval? The board members shifted uncomfortably. Furthermore, she continued, funds were allocated to non-existent projects, fence repainting, drainage upgrades, mailbox replacements, none of which appear to have occurred. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Mark, quiet, steady Mark, spoke from the back. You stole from us. Greg turned, his composure cracking. You don't understand how much time I put into this community. You mean how much you took, I said quietly. He glared at me. This is your doing. No, Ms. Raines interjected. This is your doing, Mr. Thorne. She closed the folder with a final snap. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all HOA duties pending legal review. County charges may follow, gasps echoed. Greg opened his mouth as if to protest, but words failed him. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the blinds rattled. I sat motionless, breath shaking. Months of fear, frustration, exhaustion, suddenly lighter, but not gone. Not yet. Over the next week, the neighborhood transformed. The board issued formal apologies to residents Greg had fined. Most penalties were reversed. New elections were scheduled. People who had avoided me for months now stopped by, offering awkward smiles and quiet thanks. Mrs. Lowe brought me cookies. The young couple repainted their mailbox bright blue, just because they could. Ethan finally parked his car in our driveway again without worry, but peace didn't come easily. Every morning I still half expected to find another notice on my door, another orange sticker, another accusation. Then one evening, as I watered the lavender in the planters, I saw something that made me freeze. Greg's house, empty driveway, dark windows, a for sale sign on the lawn. He was gone. No fanfare, no apology, just absence. I stood there a long while, listening to the sprinklers hiss, the cicadas hum, the sound of my own breathing. It should have felt like victory, but what I felt was something deeper, relief tangled with sorrow. Because the truth was, Greg didn't create the ugliness in Lakeview Meadows. He just exposed what was already there. The fear, the silence, the willingness to let power go unchecked. The following month, the new HOA president, a woman named Carla, invited me to join the board. I declined at first. I was tired, but she insisted, saying, if people like you don't get involved, people like Greg always will. So I agreed. And for the first time, the meetings weren't about fines or control. They were about repairs, community gardens, shared spaces, actual neighbors helping helping each other again. Still, traces of the old regime lingered. Some residents remained cautious, suspicious, waiting for the next tyrant to rise. I understood, because power doesn't vanish. It shifts, hides, waits for weakness. I promised myself I'd never let Lakeview Meadows fall into that cycle again. 3 months later, just when life had begun to feel normal, Greg returned, briefly. I saw him standing on the sidewalk one afternoon, staring at the planters. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes hollow, a man undone by his own reflection. He didn't notice me at first. I stepped outside, heart steady. Back for another inspection? I asked. He looked up slowly. You won. No, I said softly. We all did. He nodded once, then looked away. You know, those planters, they're beautiful. I know. He lingered a moment longer, then turned and walked off down the street, shoulders bowed. That was the last time I saw him. Time smoothed the sharp edges of what happened, but the memory never faded. Ethan went off to college. The lavender bloomed every spring, scenting the air like calm after thunder. The neighborhood healed in small, steady ways. Barbecues, shared laughter, fences mended not just with wood, but with words. Occasionally, new residents would ask about the enormous planters flanking my driveway. They're part of the neighborhood's history, I'd say with a small smile. A reminder of boundaries and why they matter. They'd laugh, not quite understanding, and I'd let them, because some lessons are meant to live quietly, in stone and memory. 5 years passed before I thought about Greg again. Then, one spring morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in careful, almost hesitant handwriting. Inside was a single page. Emma, you were right. I lost everything because I couldn't stop controlling what wasn't mine to control. I'm rebuilding now, one small thing at a time. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you. Greg, I read it twice, then set it down beside a vase of lavender. For a long while, I just sat there, listening to the hum of the neighborhood, the same sprinklers, the same birds, but somehow softer now. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. If you'd told me years ago that a driveway could change my life, I would have laughed, but it did. It taught me that power, no matter how small, always tests the strength of those beneath it. It showed me that silence is the soil where tyranny grows, and it reminded me that boundaries, whether of property, dignity, or principle, are not lines drawn in sand. They're carved in stone, literally. Every time I pass those planters, I touch the cool granite and remember the weight of them, the effort it took to place them, the fear I felt the night Greg tried to move them, the courage it took to stand my ground. They're more than decoration. They're testimony, a story told without words. Because sometimes in the quiet war between what's right and what's easy, victory isn't loud. It's 4 tons of granite that will never be moved.